So I want to welcome everybody to this quarterly Customer Connect event. We're going to be talking about NetBeez targeting, and this has been something that a lot of customers have asked. What more can we do with NetBeez? Because here's the reality. Before COVID, people or customers utilized NetBeez in a lot of different ways, but since COVID and the pandemic, what has happened is there's been big shifts to the cloud. There's the big push to remote and hybrid. So you're having a much larger area to cover, and people want to know how they can utilize NetBeez to be able to cover those areas. Go ahead and admit. Hopefully that'll be the last one that'll be joining. So for those of you I've not met with, and I do recognize a lot of the names here, my name is Stephen Prugar. I am a customer success engineer over here at NetBeez. I've been with the company since the end of 2019. So I'm about to start my 4th year at the company, and I'm really excited because 2023, as I've talked to a lot of you, we have a lot of projects we're working on that hopefully should come to fruition by then. And briefly want to talk about a really quick agenda. So we're just going to briefly touch on agent types just to bring everybody up to speed. Then we're going to talk about types of targets, and we're going to go into deployment types. The deployment types we're going to focus on are going to be ones with static targets. So if you're doing a lot of Wi-Fi monitoring, you may not have a ton of static targets. If you're doing a lot of troubleshooting, those targets are going to constantly change. So we're going to focus on deployments of static targets. We're going to go into advanced targeting. We're going to talk about best practices. I'll give you a little sneak peek into version 11, as I promised, and then we'll go into a Q&A. So for the Q&A, this is what I would like. If you could, okay, I got a lot of messages. Okay, I'll address those at the end. If you could put in the public chat, should have an option for that, that you have a question. So just say I have a question or something similar. I will go in order from top to bottom and answer any questions. If I can't answer the question, I will follow up. There might be some questions I may not be able to answer. I'll talk to my development or support team about, but I just want to keep it pretty organized. So I'll kind of go through one at a time and we'll answer any questions. So talk about agent types. So we do have a lot of ways you can deploy NetBeez. So you have the physical sensor, so you're wired and wireless. Virtual instances, which honestly can be applied in a lot of different situations. You can deploy on Catalyst 9300s, 95s, in some of the ISRs, I think 43 and 44s. You can deploy on a whole slew of different extreme network switches. You can deploy on KVM. You can just deploy on a Linux host, a container, and a bunch of different clouds on Windows and Mac endpoints as well. Now, when we talk about targets, we have internal targets and we have external targets. So an internal target to me is any test that's destination is internal. Doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't leave the network, but its endpoint is internally. So nodes and switches for any kind of service providers or ISPs, transit links, they talk about the ring, the circuit, stuff like that. Any kind of mesh testing, oftentimes data center, your gateway, internal DNS, internal hosted applications, internal servers, random internal networking equipment. I mean, the list can go on and on, but anything internally that is something you want to keep an eye on would be an internal test. Then we look at external targets. So this is going to be anything public, whether it's Google, Netflix, something that's a high level of availability that you want to do tests against to verify your network is able to reach out. And then you have your SaaS applications. So anything in the cloud. So AWS, Azure, Oracle, IBM, Google Cloud, etc. With those, there's actually a specific way you'll want to do those, and I'll go over that in a minute. Any kind of accounting system, HR system, collaborative tools, communications, video and voice, VoIP, your Teams, Zoom, WebEx, external DNS, your IT system, so your ticketing systems, your incident management systems. Sorry, I have a couple of people I need to admit. Any kind of storage drives, etc. So here we list, I don't know, somewhere in the ballpark of 16, and there's probably thousands of different targets you can configure or that are configurable depending on your application. But now that you have some ideas on some additional targets you may want to configure, I want to talk about targets versus resources. So this is my dashboard that I run, and What's really important is to understand that, you don't need to make a target for every single FQDN or IP address. So typically you'll want to put like things together. So in this case, we have Google. So I'm going to edit this. And here you see we have Maps, we have Mail, Drive, Google.com, etc. So what I did is let me move my face out of the way so I can see a little better. I just hit add resource, and you can add multiple resources to one target. And then it's very important to label them. And I'll show you in a minute. Just if you put like Maps and Mail and Drive, that would be sufficient. I was a little bit more specific. The reason why you want to use targets and the reason why you want to label them is this. So when you have multiple resources under one target, it groups them together. So by default, we group alphabetically. Now, if I would have made a test called DNS, that would have been up here. Or if I would have made a test called Mail, that would have been somewhere down here. But I labeled them Gmail, Google, Google Drive, Google Maps, so I can still see which one's which, because sometimes the IP, like especially down here, or the FQDN may not be like a clear indicator of which test that is. So it groups them together. So you have my Google test, my Google DNS test, my internal connectivity testing, Salesforce teams, they're all grouped together. And when you look at even more data, where you're looking at all the agents and all the tests, they're grouped together here still as well. Google DNS, mesh tests is all together, Salesforce teams. It just helps things stay a lot cleaner when it comes to setting up your dashboard. So that's one of the quick best practice that I wanted to give everybody. We'll go over some dedicated ones at the very end, but I'll give you ones throughout the Customer Connect event here. So when we talk about deployment types, like I said, there's a lot of ways to deploy NetBeez, a lot of use cases, but the ones that have static agents are going to be hybrid cloud monitoring, which if any of you are service providers or ISPs, infrastructure monitoring is going to have a lot of the same goals in mind. So they're somewhat interchangeable, except you may not have as much focus on testing cloud as you would. And then the remote offices, so the bread and butter of NetBeez, what people historically brought NetBeez on board for originally. Then we have remote worker. We'll talk about split tunnel and also full tunnel. It's important to note that very rare does a customer get on board NetBeez and just have one use case. It's very, very common to have multiple use cases, either parts of these three, or you're doing a lot of troubleshooting, you have Wi-Fi issues, maybe some change management, things like that. But I am going to focus on individual use cases and how they're configured and what they look like. But note that there's going to be a lot of overlap because you might have a big push for remote offices and a little bit in the hybrid cloud, but maybe you don't have a giant cloud presence yet, right? So I just wanted to go ahead and point that out. So hybrid cloud monitoring use case, what does that look like? Well, in this case, you're most likely moved mostly away from on-prem. You're going to be in Azure, AWS, Google, etc. You'll have multiple different deployment types or locations. So you'll be in the cloud, you'll be in data centers, you'll be remote sites, potentially remote offices as well. You'll probably do a fair bit of iPerf, maybe a little bit of speed test, SLAs, performance alerting, really important. I actually went over performance learning in a previous webinar, which is now on our YouTube channel. So you can actually go through those, all the previous ones. But the goal is typically to test reachability and performance from cloud to cloud, data center to cloud, data center to remote sites, et cetera, to get you a really good picture of what's reachable and how well your network is able to reach all these cloud applications that everybody's using within the company. So how does that look from an agent target standpoint? Well, we'll start at the top. So Linux hosts, containers in the cloud, definitely really important, first and foremost. And then your physical sensors, wired and wireless, probably virtual instances as well. But what you do is when you have an agent deployed in AWS or Google Cloud or Azure, what happens is now that can be targeted as a target as well. So what you do is, and I'll show you here in a little bit, you type in the name of the agent, whatever you have it named to, and then it'll start to autofill, then you click on it, and then it'll fill out the IP or FQDN, and now you can target that agent as an actual target. So that's how you'll set up those targets. And then other targets are going to be, you'll test remote sites, you'll test data centers, maybe internal DNS. You'll probably test VoIP. So where I've seen this is I've had some customers that have a VoIP application that is hosted in AWS Workplace. So they put an agent in AWS in their actual Azure or AWS environment, and they were doing ping with jitter, MOS, and traceroute to that particular agent, and it actually gave them accurate real-world information from their call center to their VoIP application, which is really cool. So for the remote office use case, the bread and butter, kind of what NetBeez is really founded upon originally, what this looks like is you might have dozens of remote offices around the country. You'll probably be hybrid at this point. Very few of our customers are still fully on-prem. They're either hybrid or mostly in the cloud. You'll have pretty much every agent type, whether wired, wireless, virtual, container, cloud, could also be on switches as well. Reachability is really important. So you want to be able to test, excuse me, reachability, and performance is probably a close second. So, getting performance from the remote sites to the data center, remote sites to the cloud. Remote agents kind of come in here, but still separate use case as well. But how that deployment works is pretty much you run the gauntlet with everything we offer. The only thing not listed here is Windows desktops or Windows and Mac desktops and laptops. Again, just because we're kind of trying to separate the use cases, but they kind of funnel in here as well. And then you're going to run the gambit of basically testing everything. So a couple of examples. So testing Google or something high reliability, really important. Testing your cloud, really important. Testing your internal communication, your accounting, your HR, your voice communication, your VoIP solution, everything, data center, et cetera. A really quick best practice here is, say you have 28 offices. I'll give you an example. And everybody that works in accounting is in 2 offices. You would not want to run a test on all 28 locations to your, let's say you use QuickBooks or Intuit, right? You're going to get a lot of unnecessary information. So what I recommend there is run it at those offices. Run it if you have like an agent in the data center or an agent in the cloud external, and maybe like where your support team or NOC center's at. So maybe you have it at like 5 or 6 locations, but running it at all locations probably would not give you a lot of value and give you a lot of unnecessary information. And same thing with HR, same thing with Salesforce, set that up mostly with the sales team and a couple other ancillary locations that are strategic, because that'll really help reduce, testing bloat. And all the information you're getting is very valuable. And that's part of the goal that we're trying to cover today. And lastly, the remote worker use case. So what that looks like, employees are either working remote or hybrid, mostly managed systems, but I have a couple customers that they have a lot of unmanaged devices, for a lot of different reasons. There's actually a really cool use case that was brought up recently with unmanaged devices, but simply they don't have control over the home network. A lot of people are on the network. You have no idea, if they have a whole family with a bunch of kids that are always watching Netflix during the day, especially in the summer months or winter break. ISP issues and outages, really common. A mix of on-prem and cloud, so pretty much a hybrid environment. But what people used to do back in the day before the remote worker agent came out is they would get something like a NetBeez Wi-Fi agent, and they would send them to people's homes, and they would have them hook them up to the network, and then they'd have to ask them for their password to their network. They would run tests, and hopefully it would mess up in the week or 2 they had it. Maybe it was an isolated incident that has been since solved. It takes time away from the NOC team. It took time away from the users. It took shipping time, configuration time, troubleshooting time. It was a mess, but that's what people did. They would take a sensor like that and do that. Nowadays you just deploy the software across the board and you have the real-time historical data. You can start grinding away, figure out what's wrong without trying to figure out what the user's trying to tell you in the ticket, right? But that's typically what the use case looks like. It's going to be deployed across the board, usually either the entire company or at least the remote workforce or hybrid workforce. And then this is kind of what the deployment testing looks like. Now, it's important to note you can only run 20 tests on remote agents. So you want to be a little strategic. And I'm going to talk about not running a gambit on everything when it comes to like the different test types in a little bit. But you'll definitely want to test like Google's important, test the cloud, test whatever CRM they're using. And this is where it's really important, where only put Intuit on the accounting team, only put Salesforce on the sales team. Like it like, no reason to overlap. Test Teams, test Zoom or WebEx, test their VoIP solution, test data center, probably maybe not DNS unless you're frequently experiencing DNS issues. But you can actually test over the VPN. That's not a separate test, but I can show you guys how to do that. And then the gateway test as well is also pretty important. But split tunnel versus full tunnel versus no tunnel. The gateway test has to be done either split tunnel or no tunnel VPN. Well, okay, split tunnel or no VPN is what I meant. Full tunnel VPN won't work because once it leaves the computer over network interface, it's tunnel. It can't leave that tunnel to hit the gateway and come back. It's just, there's no way we can do that. So just note that if you are running a full tunnel VPN, you can't do the gateway test, but you can also then do testing over the VPN if you are running either a split or full tunnel. So we're going to talk about advanced targeting. So we're going to talk about VoIP statistics, VPN and gateway, DNS, and some of the custom stuff as well. So VoIP, I'm going to go full screen here. Zoom. So this is what I'm running for a VoIP test here. So I'm going to edit this and show you what it looks like. So it's pretty simple. All you have to do is put the FQDN or the IP address of whatever communication server you're running. Do note that you can't like ping zoom.us or whatever have you. Most of those general sites can't be pinged. So run like a Wireshark or look at maybe some popular IP addresses. This is just an East Coast Zoom server we know. So you run a ping test. By default, it's going to run 5 seconds with 5-second timeout. As long as it's 5 seconds or less, just keep it at 5 is my recommendation. You can calculate jitter and moss. And why that's useful is if I go to look, I got to move my head out of the way here. We go to look at my remote agent over here. There we go. We can now overlay both, there we go, jitter, and over here you can see it's pretty low. And then we can also look at the moss score as well. So I've been consistently pretty good, like a 4. Was I struggling? I know I was struggling on some of my agents earlier. Yeah, so I actually had some dips earlier in the day. Luckily right now, no dips, but you can see when a jitter goes up, the moss goes down. So you can get that in real time every 5 seconds, what your connection is like to a video conferencing server, for example. The next one we'll do is, let's do DNS. Yeah. So actually, no, we'll do VPN. No, we'll do DNS, and then we'll do gateway last. So VPN, I call this VPN only. The reason why is because, here, I'm just going to move this off screen. Because the only test I'm actually running over VPN for my setup here. But what you do is you just configure a test just like you normally would whenever you want to test. And if you enforce it to run over the VPN, how it works is as long as the VPN is connected. So if we go to my remote agent here, this is green. So this is my third network interface, my Viscosity VPN. As long as this is connected, this test will run over the VPN. Otherwise, it will pause. So you won't have any alerting that will start happening out of nowhere because the VPN is not connected. If the VPN is connected and the test cannot complete, it'll go into alert status. So at that point, you'll have open alerts. But you can do that with any or all tests. So if you have a full tunnel VPN, you might want to do it that way. I mean, it's going to follow VPN regardless, but this is a way to enforce that the test is 100% running over the VPN. And so you'll also be gathering network statistics and everything over the VPN. Let's show you the gateway test. And I've shown you guys this a couple times, but I'm going to show you a couple other things about it as well. So let's go ahead and edit this. So to configure this test, and this works on all agents, this is not a remote worker only. You can do it on network agents too. It's just _gateway_. It's a ping only test. So you can't, configure others. It won't let you. I have mine set to 30 seconds. Here's the reason why. I have 14 agents on a home network. I don't want to be pinging my gateway every 5 seconds across the board. So I'm doing 30. Now to help offset any kind of delayed alerting, if we go to anomaly detections under settings, I made this 2x ping. So after 2 consecutive failures, so after a minute, I'll be alerted that there's an issue. How you do that is you click add alert, you go to up down, and you just change it to 2 or 20 or 10 or whatever you want it to be. And then you select which test type and you name whatever you want. I would not make it default unless you're going to be assigning this to most agents that you have. Because then you have to uncheck it every single time you make a new target, which is kind of annoying. And it's also redundant with the 5 consecutive as well. So I do that because I like customizing things and tailoring things to make a lot of sense. This is also where you can change the timeouts. So, if your network, if you can expect that a ping can take up to 10 seconds to respond, then you might want to configure a ping test to 10-second timeouts. If that's acceptable to your SLAs, there's no need for unnecessary alerting. Again, get good information, get useful information. Don't get too much information that's not useful to you. So that's how you can edit and configure some targeting very specifically. I did go over performance alerting in a previous webinar. I recommend you checking out, but this is where you can set specific SLA metrics. It will go yellow instead of red if it goes below, say, like a 1% packet loss over any 5-minute period. But yeah, definitely recommend checking out our previous webinar on YouTube there. And then lastly, DNS. So I'm going to edit this. We do have a lot of customers that have DNS issues that they're constantly trying to track down and resolve. So this is how you would configure a DNS specific test. First thing you do is type in the FQDN, and then you click DNS for however many servers you want. So if I want to do 4, I'd click this 2 more times, and then you fill in the DNS server that you want to point towards. So I'm doing these two, 8.8.4.4 and 8.8.8.8. And then you add 2 resources, or you add 1 resource for every server you're testing. So in this case, I did 2, and you're going to do a ping and a trace route to both DNS servers. So you don't really need to configure these any different. You can leave them as default. So what this will do is this will resolve the DNS over these 2 DNS servers, and then you'll check the response and pathing to both DNS servers. So you can get the clear picture of what's going on with the DNS. The running joke is it's always DNS. Well, you can actually prove if it's really DNS or not here. So that is, I think I hit it all here. Let me double check. Yes, we did. So what do we got next? Best practices. Okay, so identify what kind of deployments you have. So, look at what you have, and now you actually might be able to realize, hey, we can do a lot more, especially with hybrid cloud monitoring. It's become really popular. More and more customers are working with it. If you want to know how to deploy, everyone's a little different, so I'll have to get back to you on that, but definitely reach out. If you want to deploy in Azure versus Google or AWS, there's some documentation I can send you. Everyone's a little different. But also think about internal versus external targeting. The reality is you're probably going to do a little bit of one and a lot of the other. And if you have more than one use case, you'll be doing a lot of both. You can customize targeting to make alerting smoother. If you want more consecutive failures to alerting, if you want longer timeout times, if you want less frequent testing, I have a customer, because they want to run like 150 tests, which is more than we recommend on a network agent. They run frequency of pings like every 15 seconds instead of 5. So that way the server's not being overloaded. But to them, they don't need to run every 5 seconds anyway. So they're doing a 15-second with 2 consecutive failures. So they're still getting responses in 30 seconds or less. So that's really cool. Another thing, clean up the dashboard. So, think about going to your dashboard and look at any like targets and clean them up. Add multiple resources to one target. Whenever you go to generate a new target, definitely ad hoc test it first. So I was telling you earlier, and I'll show you how to do it here really quick. So edit target, add resource. So if I start to type in Wi-Fi, see how it populates here, you just click it. That is how you would target an agent. You don't want to, I would not just put the IP, I would actually type it in and then go ahead and actually select it and then run it from there. But run ad hoc tests before you configure. You cannot ping zoom.us as I mentioned earlier. So if you configure that test, it's just going to go into alert. Remove any targets that have IPs or FQDNs that have changed. We have a lot of customers that test firewall, and those change every now and then. Solutions change. You know, I know some of the IPs that you might be testing do update every year. So just make sure that you don't have, like when you go into targets, you don't see, let me close out of here to show you, exit out. You don't have like a bunch of open alerts or warnings. That's not what you want by any means. So yeah. And then I think that was it. Oh, one other thing before I show you version 11. Not all targets need everything. Let's talk about running the gamut earlier. Some things you do want to run a gamut for, some things you don't. Give you an example. Zoom, when you're testing a video conferencing solution or server, ping is important with jitter MOS, pathing is important, HTTP not important. That's not really going to give you much value, right? Mesh testing, you know, if you have like a small mesh of like 10 agents you want to test. Trace routes probably important, but like this is literally like going like 2 hops. So what kind of information am I going to get from doing HTTP test against another internal agent? Not a lot of value there. Same thing with my storage server, 2 hops, maybe a trace route. That would be about it. So think about what you need. You shouldn't just select everything on every single test. It's not going to give you all necessary information. And particularly trace route and path analysis are redundant. Path analysis gives you a lot more than trace route does. Trace route runs a lot more frequently. It's more SLA based, right? And reporting based. So pick one. Typically don't want to run both. So now, are we ready for version 11? If it works, this is on a internal test server. So it should be fine, but I did have a timeout earlier. I had to refresh. Oh, wait, I'm already spoiling it for you. Okay, so this is what we have. So this looks a bit different. If I go over to one of my agents over here, you can tell, yeah, it looks a bit different. So a couple things. You can actually look at multiple things at once. So this is the real-time graphs. This is the 15-minute span. So now you can look at CPU, memory, and jitter all at the same time. Now, you can't look at MOS at the same time. The reason why is this is latency on the left, and this is percentage usage on the right. So the latency and the jitter are both going to use millisecond response time. These will use percentages, but you can't look at MOS and jitter at the same time. So now you can view a lot more data at once. You don't have to pop this out into a separate window, which is also really nice. When you go to historical data, what you can do is you can change the time frame from start to finish. So this will be the start time. This will be a finish time. And by default, you can do like last hour, for example, just to make life easier. And then if you want to zoom into a specific span, you can do that and look at it here. And if you go to historical, you can export this to a CSV. So a lot of really good changes. This is just one change coming in 11. A lot of the changes coming in 11 will not be present to existing dashboards until like 11.1 or 11.2. We're going to be doing new target creation. We're going to be doing new user creation management, but that will be coming in version 11 for the general UI here. So 11.1, 11.2, something like that. And then lastly, we have another webinar coming up. So this one is going to be 2 weeks from today on the 20th. We do most of our webinars on Tuesdays, usually around 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern time. Giovanni is going to be hosting it. The goal is to help solve issues plaguing remote users. And well, I said the sign up is going to be pasted in the chat. I'm going to have to get that for you guys in a second. While we do the Q&A, I'll go ahead and drop it. But let me check any messages here. So we do have a general message, and then we'll kind of do one at a time. So one of the questions came in is, what is best practice for Wi-Fi quality monitoring? Any specific targets or tasks we can configure? Well, that's going to depend. I'll bring up my dashboard here because I do have a Wi-Fi agent here. Most people, by default, their first concern is connectivity. Whether it's reconnecting to the Wi-Fi testing guest network, looking at drops, looking at signal quality, bit strength, stuff like that. But what I would do is I would treat this as a wired agent. So I would still run things like testing against the gateway, testing a lot of your popular external, because one of the cool things is when you do these tests, unless you specify, actually, let me actually edit a test so I can show you here. You can, with a Wi-Fi agents, particularly Wi-Fi agent, if you're connected to a router or AP or whatever have you, you can run the test over wired and wireless, and it will report it separately. So it'll report kind of like, I don't know if my Wi-Fi has, okay, but you'll have main, and then you'll have your Wi-Fi, and then your wired. So you can compare the data between wired and wireless, but I would still configure a lot of the same things because, you know, yes, you're getting the connection, like if you have a wired agent and you're running everything at your CRM, your VoIP and everything like that. But a lot of people are connected over Wi-Fi in the office. So getting that same kind of information over the Wi-Fi is really important. So I'd still run the gambit like here, right? So I would still do all of these tests just like you would with any other wired agent. Can NetBeez agent run on Chrome? As of now, no. We do not have an agent that runs on Google OS like a Chromebook. It is something that has been requested quite a few times, but it's really about, you know, we've seen it in small capacities. We're trying to make sure if we're going to put resource in something like that, it's going to benefit our customers, because something like that's a pretty tall order. But what I will do is I will put you down as that's a feature request that you'd be interested in. So let me actually open up a quick notepad so I can write this down here. So who else? Okay, our DNS contests are conducted across all configured DNS servers configured on the client device, or just the first. So it's just going to test it over the first, I believe. But I will double check that. So let me copy and paste this question. And that was you. And then what automation can we do with agent name on a computer name? Will Windows 11 show the computer name? Well, it by default, and maybe you have a follow-up question. By default, it should pull the name of the computer. So if you're using AD, it's going to pull that name. So I named mine desktop laptop just because I wanted to. But it typically pulls the actual name assigned to it. There is some things within our API here. Yes, AD would be one of them. But you can definitely do some things with the API with renaming stuff. That is something that I've seen some customers do. But I will, if you have any questions about that, just email support@netbeez.net. Because they're going to know a bit more about the API than I do, unfortunately. Are there any other questions? Those came through the chat, some direct, some public. Actually, I think most of them were direct, which is fine. Let me. This is alphabetical. Give me 1 second here. Oh, I did say that I would put this in the chat. So give me 1 second. Scroll up. There it is. Okay, let me put this in the chat for everybody to see in case you want to sign up to our next webinar. Meeting, send. If you do have, okay, so everybody that is still remaining, I'm going to, okay, so I'll say, okay, let me go ahead and stop the recording.